Hello, my name is Marcelo Wallau. I'm the Forage Extension Specialist with the Agronomy Department at the University of Florida. And today we're going to talk about pasture establishment. Pasture establishment is the most crucial phase of pasture production because, after all, if we cannot get a pasture established, we don't have a pasture to work with. The goal here is for us to get a quick establishment of whatever forage we want so that we can use it early and cheap in terms of price, cost of production, and also free of weeds. In this talk, we're going to cover many aspects of pasture production. But first of all, I want to talk about some of the different establishment strategies that are very important to define the course of action. Later on, we're going to talk about the action items, what I call the 5 P's of pasture establishment, or the 5 P's of pasture planting. First of all, let's start with planting material. Very important distinction. In Florida, we have many forages that are planted via seed and some very important forages that are planted using vegetative plant material. Seeded forages like Bahia grass, like our annual forages like sorghum, rye, sorghum Sudan, ryegrasses, clovers, and many others. Those are normally easier and cheaper to establish. They can be drilled or broadcast on a pasture, and they are very interesting because you have a large array of varieties that can be used with those forages. Vegetatively propagated forages, as the name says, it use vegetative plant parts to be able to establish. They are normally way more labor intensive, more expensive to establish. They normally take longer to establish and are also destructive. That means we're destroying the pasture we're getting for. Well, sort of. When you use sprigs, which are the rhizomes, we're digging those sprigs. When we use tops, we don't need to destroy that pasture. Bermuda grass can be established using both. Perennial peanut, only using sprigs. Limpo grass, only using tops. And those are the 3 main forages that we use in Florida that are planted using vegetative plant material. Timing of planting is very important. First, for the planting itself, there is enough moisture, there is proper soil conditions for the planting, and also for the plant material, because it's important for us to work with mature plant materials with the highest possible level of energy reserves. That means tops during midsummer, because that's when plants are grown and mature, and sprigs normally during the winter before they break dormancy, or in the middle of the summer after the reserves are replenished. So several forages can be established by seed. For example, sorghum here on the top, and you can see that we're using just one species, a monoculture, or we can use a mixture of species that are planted also by seed. And the seeds can be put in the ground using a seed drill or a seeder, depending on what we're doing. Normally corn, sorghum, and some of those other bigger seeds, we use a seeder, a vacuum seeder, or they can also be broadcast. And here we have an example of a broadcast spreader and a tarp that we can use for calibrating this spreader. You can see how it spreads the seeds in the ground. The main thing, that most of the difference here is going to be with forages that are established using vegetative plant material. As I mentioned before, they can be established using sprigs, and here is an example of rhizoma peanut. And here in the bottom is an example of limpo grass we're established using tops. Remember, those need to be very mature, well fertilized planting material to increase the amount of reserves that those plants have and increase the chances of success of our establishment. We harvest those materials. Here's 2 pictures of limpo grass after a cut, either baled, it can be baled in square bales or round bales, or as loose planting material. It's very important that this planting material that's fresh is harvested and planted as soon as possible, because those bales are going to start heating up pretty quick, and if we wait more than overnight, it's going to start losing germination potential. Here's another example using the Bermuda grass king, the sprig diggers in the top, and the sprig planter, the sprigger, here in the bottom, planting Bermuda grass sprigs. Or we can do the spreading by hand. It's a lot of labor, normally recommended only for small areas, but is an option for planting those tops. The tops can also be planted using something like a hay buster to bust those big bales of plant material, of tops, and spread in the area. And then the next step we're going to do is disc those tops in, or disc those sprigs in. It's very important to get this pretty quickly after spreading, so there is no time for those plant materials to dry out, especially when we're planting using tops. So spreading and disking them in, probably 4 to 5 inches deep, not more than that. A light disc should do. And then we're going to roll behind the disc. One important thing, so we don't dig too much, we're not burying those plant materials, those tops too deep, is to decrease the angle of the gangs in your disc harrow. So an example here where we take the bite out of that disc harrow, so it's not revolving a lot of ground, but penetrating and pushing those sprig downwards. Second distinction I want to make here in terms of planting method, we can go into a prepared seed bed, or we can go overseeding. Prepared seed bed is something that we see a lot in Florida, where we're going to broadcast or drill, both either broadcast or drill, into an area that has been prepared. And normally we're talking about perennial pastures, or when using vegetative plant material, we're going to disc that area. We can normally get a better weed control because it's destructive. We're going to till that sod. We're going to let the weed seeds germinate, the seed bank germinate, spray it, disc it again, and through subsequent and alternated spraying and disking, we can really reduce that weed population. It's also a good way for incorporating lime. Overseeding, on the other hand, we're going to use only for annual crops and when we're planting over the sod. So this practice is very used in Florida in the perennial warm season pastures during the winter when we want to establish a cool season forage crop. It does not kill the sod. It can either be broadcast or drilled. And normally for only broadcasting, we can only do with small seeded things like ryegrass and clovers. And we need to realize that whenever we're just broadcasting, our chances of success are reduced, and normally our pasture is going to be delayed because we're not getting that seed in close contact with the soil. Still, we need to do some prep. It's not just broadcast or drill on any pasture. We need to do some vegetation control. Normally we do that through heavy grazing, through low mowing, low stubble height, or with a light disking. Important to note also is that that thatch and that perennial sod that's going to be there is going to immobilize our nitrogen. So it's going to be a slow start and probably take more nitrogen to get that production going. Here's an example where we're trying prepared seed bed and no-till, and this is in prepared seed bed. You can use a regular drill, which is the top here, or a no-till drill. Is also important to make sure the seed depth is right. We're going to talk more about seed depth later on. Here is an example of no-till. Importance of sod control. If we don't control the thatch, if we don't remove the thatch is going to be competing for nutrients, for light, for water, for nitrogen with our new pasture, so it's going to delay. So it's very important to have a pretty decent sod control here before we put the drill on the ground. And we also can do the broadcasting. Again, broadcasting is normally not the best practice, but is an easy practice, and many times for farmers that don't have the adequate equipment, this is going to be much cheaper. $500 spreader versus a $15,000 or $20,000 small drill that they can be used. Light disking is a way to disturb that sod, disturb that soil, get more seeds in contact to the soil to be able to get that pasture established quicker. And last distinction between planting strategies here, we're going to talk about perennial and annual forages. Perennial forages in Florida are mostly Bermuda grass, Bahia grass, limpo grass, and perennial peanut. It's a long-term investment, normally can be very expensive in the short term, but the cost is diluted for long years of use, assuming the pasture is well maintained. It's important to do it right from the beginning. A clean seed bed, control of existing pasture whenever transitioning for a new cultivar or a new species, so there is no competition, and get that pasture established well fertilized, is going to last for a long time. Our annual forages like sorghum, oat, rye, ryegrass, and many others are a short-term investment. It's like a quick establishment, quick turnover, really good productivity, and normally very good quality. Will require a high level of investment also in a short term because we need to make sure the nutrients are there for those pastures to succeed. And here we're using normally one crop or 1 year mindset. Same area can have both annuals and perennials, as we talked about the overseeding on sod, or sometimes I like using annuals, 2 or 3 cycles of annual forages when I'm changing the Bahia grass cultivar or Bermuda grass cultivar in a pasture that already had one of those warm season perennial grasses. So we can break some of the weed cycle and also can eliminate the seed bank in the soil. Let's get to the action part, how to get this done. I like to divide pasture establishment in 5 different P's: planning, prepping, planting, priming, and finally putting it to use. Let's go through some of those phases with a few examples. Keep in mind there's just a limited amount of examples I can give you here. Each situation is going to be different, and I hope that with the information presented here it can give you tools to assess the situation that your farmer is in so you can better advise this farmer. First of all, planning. Some of the process take a long time. Liming, for example, weed control. And some aspects need to be thought thoroughly before we put the pasture in the ground. There are many things that cannot be controlled, but there are lots of planning that can help you mitigate any other issues. Let's think about the planning phase. What do I need to think about when planning my pasture establishment? What, when, and how? What to grow? When is the right time for that to grow, and how I'm going to plant it? This is related to the choice of species and cultivars. If you think about the other discussions we have in terms of pasture diversity and trying to have more pasture throughout the year, this is where our rationale is coming from. How can I plan my pasture system that I have multiple forages growing and that I have pasture basically growing year round? The history of the area, what has been planted before, what's the weed pressure, herbicides and fertilizer residual. Herbicides are residual is very important because it can limit what we can grow in that area. And what's going to be done after. If it's a perennial pasture, it's going to be a perennial pasture. If it's an annual pasture, is it going to go back into perennial pastures and going to go back into crop production? Or it's going to be maintained in an annual forage crop. So all those things need to be thought about before even we start planning the actual establishment phase. Residual herbicides, what have been used in the previous crops. 2 examples. Aminopyrrolate here, normally used in pasture. Grazon X is one of the examples. It will limit establishment of any legume. So if we had that in our perennial pasture, we cannot put a legume crop there. Cadre after peanut, it's a common herbicide used in peanut. It's going to limit the establishment of Bahia grass after peanut. Weed pressure. It's much cheaper to control weeds before we establish our pasture. There is a large array of herbicides that can be used. Broad spectrum herbicides that are much cheaper. Once we have the pasture in the ground established, herbicide options are much more limited. Many other management practices are possible, like tilling that I mentioned before. And last, nutrient management. Residual nutrients from the previous crop or immobilization of nutrients, such as immobilization of nitrogen in that thatch. That's important to consider. And main thing, soil test. It's very important to get a soil test early on, see what the level of nutrients in the soil are, what the pH is, so we can plan accordingly. If we need to lime, for example, it's going to be 3 to 6 months before we can start moving that pH up after application. So we need time to get that done. Another thing I like to think about is how is this area going to be used? What productivity level I need? Do I need quantity, quality, or both? What type of management I'm going to implement? What are my management goals? What are my investment capacity and willingness to invest on that pasture in terms of maintenance and productivity? Season, when do I need my forage the most? And there is no best forage. There is no best cultivar. It's all a matter of what I'm going to use it for, what type of livestock I'm going to be grazing or cutting hay. What grows well in my pasture, the soil type, the level of investment on the crop, and also the equipment availability. If I don't have the proper equipment, it's going to make it difficult to establish some of the pastures, so let's opt for an option that will do with the equipment we have available. Cultivar selection is the first decision we need to make once we decide, okay, this is going to be this is my need, those are the goals I want to do. I want to go with this species and what type of cultivar. Cultivar selection is important for the productivity, for the maturity, and for the quality, and for the different use. Not all sorghums in the picture are equal. There's sorghum Sudan. Within those species and hybrids, there are several different hybrids that can be used. Oat, the same way. Some are earlier, some are late. Defining what use we need is going to be important for deciding which cultivar to select. And very important, disease resistance is related to genetic. It's related to cultivar. It is a genetic trait and is our first integrated pest management practice. Choosing the right cultivar is going to save us money in disease control. In terms of equipment, we have no-till equipment, no-till drills. We can use it in prepared seedbed, or we can also broadcast, as we mentioned before. So equipment availability is going to determine what I can grow. Mind that even in small farms, sometimes they don't have the right equipment, but there are certain practices we can use to ensure that the pastures are well established. If you don't have a drill, doesn't mean you cannot establish anything. That means you may have to go a few extra steps to ensure that seed is in the ground and well packed and have good seed to soil contact. The goals, the species to be planted are going to be important deciding factors in terms of how I'm going to go in terms of prepared seedbed or overseeding, broadcast or grill. Overseeding, there is always a lot more competition. There is always immobilization of nitrogen in the early phases because of that thatch, because of that existing sod there. In general, when we're thinking about broadcasting plus disking and rolling, it has less success than drilling. Broadcasting over sod equals less germination and slower development of that forage. So if we need fast growing forage, we probably need to go drilling and also on a prepared seedbed. If our goal is to maintain that sod and just complement the forage during the winter, now we can drill or broadcast over that sod and it's still going to work, just in different timings. Many people don't understand much about the difference in no-till drill, so it's important to ask your farmer if they're using a no-till drill, what type of drill and how does it work. Here's an example of the bottom part of a no-till drill where we have the corrugated coulters that are going to open the furrow, a set of double disc openers where the seeds are being dropped, and a press wheel in the back to pack that seed to make sure there is good seed to soil contact, and also to regulate the depth. Seed depth is something we're going to talk a little bit later. Here is a regular drill. Normally we have 2 sets of disc openers, but we don't have the front coulter. In this example here, we'll have only one set. This is an old drill, and we can only use this in prepared seedbed because otherwise it does not have the disc and the weight to open that furrow and to put the seeds inside, to put those seeds in the ground. So it's basically almost as the same thing as broadcasting. It's just going to put the seeds on top of the ground. And here's broadcasting. Broadcasting does not work well for all crops, especially if overseeding, but we can broadcast on prepared seedbed, harrow it and roll it. It also is going to do a great job. Normally when we broadcast any seed, normally when we broadcast over sod, we're talking about ryegrass and maybe clovers. We are normally looking into a higher seeding rate than if you're drilling, just because the method is not as successful. There's more chances of failure also. In this example here, normally one of the challenges of working with broadcast spreader is calibration. This is a pendulum spreader from Vicon, and they have also a box that catches the seed. Is a little easier to calibrate, but calibrating this takes a while. We'll talk about calibration in the next slide here. Meanwhile, there is some good material in terms of seed, forage seed equipment, what type of equipment and how to calibrate those in our EDIS repository. Let's go for point number 2, getting ready. And those things take time. So again, planning in advance, going ahead of time, making sure you are doing right is important. Land prep, disc till, herbicide, mow, burn. Those are different techniques for land prepping depending on what we're going to do, depending on what technique you use, depending on what planting technique you have. Also fertilize and lime, and also the choice of seed. Let's go through some of examples here when I did not prepare my area in advance. So this area was prepared the day of plant. Light disking, rototilled, and no-till. There is other things going on here, but you see wherever we rototill, we really broke up that sod versus the light disking. We're able to get a little better, but still very poor fertility here. We need to think about that ahead of time. In some of the areas we have a heavy thatch. That thatch is going to compete for the water, nutrients, and lights, is going to smother the seeds in the seedlings. So we need to make sure we remove that thatch. Heavy competition from the thatch here in terms of light, water, and nutrients again. One strip was mowed very short versus another strip that was not mowed short prior to planting. And you can see the difference in establishment rate of ryegrass here. Then we go into seedbed preparation. To prepare seedbed, my goal here is to plow or disc this land at least 2 to 4 weeks prior to planting, let it settle, let it firm. We can also incorporate lime and sometimes P and K. This helps controlling weeds and is important to allot time for the land to settle and pack prior to planting, because we want the seedbed to be firm to ensure seed to soil contact. Is very important in the Florida sandy soils. If you come from a region where have heavier clay soils, you may not put so much emphasis on this part, but here in Florida, normally we're going to pack this land, we're going to roll the seedbed prior to planting to ensure there is good seed to soil contact. Fluffy soils is going to dry very quickly, and fluffy soil sometimes also can cause clogging issues in your drill. Here are 2 examples of land prep: heavy disc bursting the sod, and then bottom plow. This is not as frequently used, turning the soil. This is a good way to also to bury some of the weed seeds, but normally take a lot of time, a lot of horsepower. Most people are going to use just a disc harrow, different types of disc harrow to prepare that land. And here is an example of an area that was rolled. This is a very big roll in large acreage, and this is how the land looks after we plant with the no-till seed drill. Let's talk about seed sources, ordering the seeds. Many times, ordering seeds is a process. We need to source those in advance and make sure we have those seeds in time for us to plant. There are many cultivars available for the different forages you want to plant. So be sure to look into our forage variety recommendations before making your decision. And many times your local store might not carry the one variety you want, but it's important to choose recommended varieties because the common varieties are going to perform limited. Something to look into: cultivar value, what's recommended. Cultivars are developed for specific purposes in specific regions. So the forages that we develop here in Florida are meant for use in Florida, for your use, for our farmers' use. So they're normally adapted to the conditions and types of use our farmers have here. Seed purity and viability, that means the vigor. How are those seeds going to emerge? And remember, we want very fast emergence and good emergence. Contaminants, I'm talking about weed seeds. Make sure that this is as free as possible of weed seeds and definitely with no noxious weeds. And also coating. Some of those seeds have coating, and that's going to add weight. So whenever we're planting something by weight, that coating is going to throw off our seeding rate. We need to correct for that coating. Let's talk about variety first. Here I have two examples of Cocker 227 oat or versus Legend oat. This is from a couple of years ago, so prices might be different, but the rationale is the same. Cocker is a common variety, very much used around here. Legend is a top variety developed by UF for dairy systems that is very early producing and resistant to this point to rust. Legend costs 39% more than Cocker per bag, so it's going to be a higher cost per acre, but also has 45% greater productivity. And more important than that is also earlier producing. In a grazing system, we want that forage to be early. So by choosing the proper variety here, we're not only getting a greater amount of forage, but also a long grazing season that's going to save us money in the longer run. In terms of pure and viable seeds, important to read the seed tag. Here is a seed tag of crimson clover that has 46% pure seeds. Of those 46% of pure seeds, we have 80% germination. That means we have a 0.368 multiplier here. Considering we have a target seeding rate of 20 pounds per acre, we need to correct that. If we're using this seed here from this tag, we need to correct that 20 pounds per acre to 54 pounds per acre to achieve the same amount of seeds I want, because those seeds are coated and also they have not 100% germination, which no seeds are going to have a tag with 100% germination. Also, it's important to think what you're planting. There are lots of things that don't grow here. This is a tag from one of our local stores or big stores that was selling a pasture mix from the south. And if you look into this tag, you can see it's Pensacola, Bahia grass, brown top millet, perennial ryegrass that does not grow here. Bahia and millet are summer forage. Perennial grass is a winter forage. We have annual ryegrass that is good for here, but not to plant it in the summer. And definitely not, this variety is not recommended. Kentucky 32, Tau fescue, another forage, winter perennial forage that does not grow here. Wrangler Bermuda grass, another one that's not very recommended. The seeded Bermuda grass don't perform as well as the hybrids. Summer forage, crimson clover, winter forage. So we have a mixture of perennials and annuals, winter and summer forages here. So what is going to grow? When am I going to plant that? In this case here, probably is a waste of money to buy some seed like this, because none of those forages are recommended. Several of those don't grow here. So look into the recommendation, see what is recommended, see what your goal is, and buy the proper seeds. Just don't buy those mixes. Talking about mixes, 15-way mixes, 7-way mixes, 10-way mixes, very popular nowadays. What ends happening is that 2 or 3 forages are the most important. They are going to survive better, they're going to produce better, and everything else is just not going to do well. That means it's a waste of resources. Instead of buying those 15-way mixes, choose 3-4 forage species that can complement each other in time, in space, in terms of canopy architecture, in growing season, maturity, in resistant to pests and diseases, and also in function. Maybe a grass and a legume, but you consider those 5 points and you don't really need to go with a 15-way mix. You need to choose forages that are going to grow in our environment. Let's go to our third point, our third P, which is planting. Let's get dirty and go to the field. And actually, before we head to the field, I'm going to talk about machinery maintenance, because one of the main things that is one of the most frustrating things, and that really can derail the planting process. We're going to talk about seed treatment, calibration of our equipment, and also checking behind that drill. important thing here. Machinery, maintenance, cleaning, should have done that before getting to the field. So after use, after the end of the season, instead of in the beginning of the next planting season, after the end of the season, go ahead and get that maintenance going on. First thing, deciding when to plant. Weather can be unpredictable, but we have tools that can help forecasting climate patterns and weather patterns. So use those tools to define when you are planting, and actually as you get closer to planting date, weekly weather forecasts can be very helpful to determine if we should plant in that time or not. Planting date is another important thing. In this example here from the University of Georgia, whenever they were looking into per millet, you can see that as we delay planting date, productivity goes much lower. So finding the right planting date is very important, but also playing with planting dates, specifically on the annual forages, can help you manage your forage seasonality. That's a different concept that we're going to explore in another video. Let's go to the machinery maintenance. It can be very frustrating. Go to the field, you don't have the tools, you have problems with your machinery, so make sure everything is working fine before you leave the shop. Otherwise you can get bed clogs, or you can plant several acres after realizing that your chains are off the sprocket and you're not putting any seeds in the ground. Another thing with grain drills is important to clean those tubes there. Those seed tubes can clog very easily with seeds left over from the previous year, mud daubers, spider webs growing inside, and many other things. So blow every single seed tube, make sure they are flowing well. When you put the seeds in the seed drill, turn the wheels, turn the mechanisms, the activation mechanisms, make sure everything is falling okay before you put that seed, the drill in the ground. Those tubes can also clog very easily on soft and moist soil, so checking in periodically to make sure seeds are flowing freely is very important. When using coated seeds, and this is a special problem with broadcasting, this is an example of coated seeds with a broadcaster with an agitator, and the agitator inside end up scraping that coating off of the seeds and that cause clogging issues. We're talking about clover, very small gap, very small seeding rate, small seeds. That's why that gap is small there, and resulted in clogging, and we're not putting any seeds in the ground. This is affecting our seeding rate. Seed size and equipment calibration. Very important. Some charts are not very accurate, so make sure that you are calibrating for that one seed you are planting, or that mixture of seeds you are planting. Same variety, same species, two different varieties of oat here are going to have different seed weight, different seed size. When you're broadcasting, make sure your equipment is properly leveled. And also in terms of broadcasting, we need to find out what's the width of our pass and what is the speed of our tractor. That is going to give us our seeding rate. Again, a lot of things to cover, so look into our IFAS repository for information on how to calibrate some of those equipment. What do I mean about calibration? That example, especially with the leveling part, is the equipment set up in the tractor, and then we have the equipment calibration. Calibration is how much seeds we're putting. What's the seeding rate, what's the seeding depth, and also the correct functioning. Keep in mind that the charts that come with the equipment, the charts that are on the lead of the drill, are generalized. They are made based on averages. So the charts can throw you off even 50% on your seeding rate because of the things I mentioned before. The same species of seed can have seeds of different size and seeds of different weight. So calibrating based only on the chart is not a good idea. Make sure you measure. First step for calibrating our drill. Let's go through this pretty quickly here, but first step of calibrating the drill, which is pretty easy. We need to know what the row spacing is. Think about the row spacing as the length, the row spacing times the length of the drive as the area you are planting. with that area, we can equate the area being planted to the seeding rate per acre. It's a pretty simple concept. So we're going to set up an area, or set up another way to do it is calculating the circumference of the drive wheel in your drill, so you don't have to be in the field. You can do this in the barn. You calculate the circumference of the drive wheel and turn the drive wheel so many times to reach a specified length of your plot that you are calculating. You need to collect the seeds, weigh the seeds, and this is the amount of seed that's going to fall in that specified area. And then we equate that to what would be for 1 acre. Let's look into this calculation here. Let's consider our targeting seeding rate of rye for 80 pounds per acre. Our row spacing, our seed drill, is on 7.5 inch center. That means 0.625 feet. And I'm going to calibrate, my calibrating distance is 100 feet. I put 2 flags in 100 feet, and I'm going to drop the drill and drive those 100 feet. Alternatively, we can measure the circumference of the wheel, of the drive wheel of the drill, and just turn it so many times to achieve that distance you want to find. When we multiply those two here, we get the area cover, 62.5 square feet. 62.5 square feet is 0.0014 of an acre, proportion of an acre. And then this number can be multiplied by our seeding rate to find how many pounds of seeds I need per row when I'm collecting those seeds. So that's a pretty simple way to calibrate your any type of drill based on weight. Second thing here, making sure things are going right, seeding depth and seeding density. It's very important that we have the right spacing for those seeds, because otherwise they are competing with each other, or the opposite, leaving space empty for weeds. Plant population, very important concept. A limited plant density equals poor stand and more space for weeds. But more plants do not necessarily mean greater yield. First of all, it's a greater expense, but also it increases competition, increases problems with diseases and lodging, because the plants are very crowded, they're going to grow tall, there is little airflow, and it's going to result in other issues in your pasture. We don't want that either. Some species can compensate better than others for variation in plant population. So look into what is recommended for the different species and for the different varieties you're planting before choosing that planting density. When do we normally go high? Low seed quality, old seeds, planting in unfavorable conditions, broadcasting. That's when we're normally going to add maybe 20-30% more seeds than the recommended rate. Again, important to correct your seeding rate to the pure and viable seeds that is in your seed tag. Another important concept, seeding depth. Different forages, different species are going to have different seeding depth, and that's normally based on the size of the seed. Big seed size has greater energy, can be put at a deeper depth. But if we end up putting seeds too deep, as it is explained here, there is a lot of energy that the seed is going to waste trying to break the soil surface. It's going to delay germination, and also is going to weaken that plant. Is going to be much more susceptible. The other thing that delayed germination is going to open space for weeds and other problems. So proper seeding depth is very important here. One thing that is important to mention is legume inoculation. So legume crops can fix their own nitrogen, and it's important to have them inoculated. Inoculate just prior to planting. Again, some of our IFAS documents are going to indicate what are the best procedures for inoculation, and also look into the inoculant instructions for use. Important thing is to do just prior to planting. Even if you buy pre-inoculated seeds, I recommend those to be re-inoculated because of the viability of that pre-inoculant. And also look into the specificity of inoculant. What type of legume you're planting, make sure that the inoculant you are getting is proper for that type of legume. Once we put the seeds on the ground, I mentioned this seed to soil contact many times. And here's a good example. This where seeds were broadcast. This was not drilled. So we broadcast here and rolled. The roller was a little bit too light, and you can see what happened only on the places that the tractor went through. You can see the wheels of the tractor, a lot more pressure in the ground. Those were the places that we end up having better germination because there was a poor seed to soil contact. Here what happened? We broadcast on top of the ground, very sandy soils. The seeds didn't go inside, didn't go into the soil. It dried out and we had poor germination. So again, making sure those seeds are packed well into the ground is very important. Step number 4, priming it. I want to give it a chance, make sure that the plants have a chance to thrive. Mainly here, we're going to talk about fertilization and weed control, but also plant protection. Note that some of this comes before planting in the seeds or at planting with products that can be put during planting. I'm not going to get in specific here because then each forage species is going to have a different set of techniques and products that can be used, but think about plant protection like pre-emergent herbicides, insecticides and fungicides for soil-borne pests and diseases. Here's an example of lack of fertilization right after planting, so we're not giving our forages opportunity to grow. The tall patches here is where we have animal excreta, higher concentration of nutrients versus where we didn't have. On top of that, we are also planting on heavy sod with heavy thatch. So there is a lot of things going on there. Thatch, soil, sod, immobilizing that nitrogen, not making it available for the plants. This is a Bahia grass pasture that was established. This is 2 months after planting, lots of weeds. Problem is here, this area had been recently cleared and the pH was 4.2, very low levels of P and K. So we didn't do our homework, we didn't get that pH level up, we didn't put phosphorus and potassium in the soil, so our nutrients are low, nutrient levels are low, and nutrient availability is even low. It makes it even lower because we didn't get that lime in the soil. So again, lack of preparation, lack of that first step, second step of preparing the land properly is going to result in a failed pasture, much more weed problem in the future. So what fertilization, what do we think about fertilization? First of all, target pH. Make sure that the pH is right for the target species we're planting. Starter fertilizer, can we put starter fertilizer? I normally like to put starter fertilizer after the plants are growing, after we have establishment, normally 7 to 10 days, depending on what we have. So there is some plant, there is some root structure there to pick up that nitrogen. We normally start with 30 to 50 pounds if we're overseeding. If there's thatch of nitrogen. Normally soils in Florida have a high concentration of phosphorus, and we're normally looking into 40 pounds of potassium, or half of the recommended rate if it's more than that. 40 to 50 days later, we can come with the remaining phosphorus, with the remaining potassium, and maybe more 50 pounds of nitrogen. Again, question mark here, because it really depends on the crop. If we're talking about corn, sorghum, we're going to be in a much different schedule, much more intensive and frequent fertilization here, versus when we're looking into a much slower growing Bahia grass or Bermuda grass. Weed control. Ideally, we're going to do weed control before we plant our pasture. Clean seed beds, low incidence of weed, much cheaper approach. But we can use, there's an array of herbicides that can be used. They're specific to the crop being planted, and every time I can use a pre-emergent with residual, I'm going to use it because it really helps on keeping weeds at bay after planting. Look into our weed management guide for establishment of pastures for more information specific to what you want to plant. And monitor the weeds as they grow before fertilizing, because if our pasture is weak, there is not a lot of growth in our pasture, but the weeds are there, they are going to use the nitrogen, that nutrient. So it's better to spray and then after fertilize after we have the weeds controlled. Our last part here, put into use, time to graze, time to cut. Let's make sure the plants are well established before we put them to use. Very important. What do I mean about that? How early can I use? Really depends on what type of forage you are planting. Sorghum, maybe 45 days. Oat, rye, also 45, 50 days. Bermuda grass, limpo grass, 90 days before we can use lightly, light grazing, or even more. Perennial peanut sometimes is going to be a couple of years before you can really use that pasture. Very important. Wait for the canopy to close. Wait for the ground to be covered, the plants to be using all the resources, using the resources the best before we put to use. A light grazing can help tillering, but overgrazing can set your pasture back a lot. So do not use those pastures too early. Respect the minimum stubble height when grazing. Remove those animals after they reach that stubble height. Give the pasture the chance to grow again. Here are two examples of cool season forages where it's a little bit too early to start grazing. You can see the rows here. You can see there's pretty decent amount of biomass there, but you can see a lot of the gap between the rows. Not closed canopy yet. On this other end here, probably a little later than I would want, but here I'm not going to, the grazing is not going to be detrimental to the pasture because the pasture has already reached its full potential of growth. Now we're going to graze it, respect the stubble height, make sure there is plenty of leaves left behind after we graze, move the cattle on. Each forage is going to have a different time for establishment. Each forage is going to have a different type of management, different stubble height, different initial canopy height before grazing, different stubble height. Look into our IFAS resources to learn a little bit more about those parameters that we recommend people to use. Common sense goes a long way. How does the pasture look? Is it ready to be grazed or not? Has it closed canopy? When animals are grazing, make sure there is residual leaf area before the pasture. Make sure there is residual leaf area, and move the animals. Don't let them graze below that desirable stubble height. Otherwise, it's going to be detrimental for the pasture. There's a lot of resources in our IFAS repository of extension publications, and there is many other resources that we have available if you have the need. Reach out to us through forages@ifas.ufl.edu. If you have any questions about this video, any suggestions, or any follow-ups in any of the content that was presented here. Thank you.